Here comes everyone. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this live demonstration of some of our really exciting new features that we've built into the Apply platform. We've got Bradley Franks here today with us, our head of sales, who will be running through these new features that we've really designed to help out on a range of issues and a range of just to make a range of things even easier when you're using the platform. And so I am just going to give a couple more minutes for a few people to start rolling in, to finish coming in here. Hi, Tim. Hello. Hi, Lauren.
Hi, Tim.
Hi, Emily. Hi, Fernando. Really lovely to see so many people. If at any point you've got a question for Bradley, you can just pop it here in the chat. I'll be taking myself out of the stream, but I'll be monitoring the chat. So please do ask your questions, and Bradley, feel free. You can either take them as you go if you see them, or we can kind of put them to you at the end there. Yeah. Okay, I will hand over to Bradley now to get going. Thanks everyone for joining, and we really hope you find this informative. But as always, please do contact your relationship manager, your customer success manager, or your contact in sales if you'd like to know more. Okay, I'll hand over to Bradley.
Thanks, Kayla. Hi, everybody. Some familiar names in the chat. Hi, Sean. Nice of you to dial in all the way from Australia. I know it's fairly late. I think the primary reason that we're doing this session for existing and prospective customers is actually to address what Tim from LandAid has just outlined, which is like AI is not going to go away, and AI generated entries to all forms of job applications are here to stay. And we've been doing quite a lot of thinking around that. And we've been thinking around how you can maintain mitigating bias and hiring fairly, whilst also being aware of AI generated answers and actually detecting and dissuading their use where relevant in the hiring process. So that's what we're going to primarily focus on today. Like, we've got our finger on the pulse of what's happening in the world, and we want to make sure that we're sort of at the cutting edge of approaching these topics. So for those of you who aren't using Applied or aren't familiar with what we do and are just joining to get a sense of what we offer, I'm going to start by very quickly giving an overview of how we think about shortlisting specifically here at Applied, before then turning our focus onto a few key updates in the product. So the first thing I'm going to focus on is how we are dissuading candidates from actually submitting AI-generated answers where we don't want them to be used. The second thing I'm going to focus on is having dissuaded, if people have utilized AI-generated answers, how do we detect them at scale and automate the way in which we reject candidates based off that? And then the third element that I'm going to be focusing on is for those of you who've not seen it, given that AI-generated answers, are a part of application processes, how can you stack a debiased CV screen into the recruitment process? What does that look like if you wanted to utilize a resume? And then finally, quick update on some new role creation functionality that I think would be a welcome introduction for organizations that are hiring in a way that's remote first, or at the very least hybrid. So that's the focus for today. It's not going to take too long. I'd imagine we'll be sort of dusted with all of the functionality by 1:30. But post questions throughout in the chat. I'll try and get to everything as we go along, but there will be time at the end for you to ask any questions, really on anything. I don't know if I can let people on stage, but if we can, I'd love to have some people talking as well. So without further ado, like, what is Applied? Who are we? Why are we different? Why should you care about what we're doing? For those of you who are customers of ours, you already know. For those of you who aren't, we are an ATS. We're an applicant tracking system that typically people in HR teams use to achieve hiring fairly, hiring without bias, and collecting data to improve the process over time, offering a really smooth candidate experience where every application is treated fairly. In terms of how we remove bias, I think one of the most recent updates we've made in the product that some of you might be aware of is the ability to review CVs anonymously and in a way that's debiased, along with utilizing work sample questions. And we thought long and hard about this. Lots of organizations that were using Applied were still using resumes but anonymizing them. That process was time consuming. It was often unpredictable. There wasn't rigor around what you were looking for. And it was inconsistent. So there was there were no quantitative outputs that we were looking towards when reviewing resumes. And that process meant that there was a lot of bias. So one of the things that we're going to be touching on today is how we automatically redact names from resumes, and how if you are seeing AI generated answers and you need to stack different forms of assessment together, you can end up with a more predictive overview and a more holistic overview of the whole candidate's application in setting certain focus questions that relate to the job. So I'm going to quickly talk about what the ideal shortlisting process looks like through Applied, and what that means for you. So traditionally, you might see, a standard CV cover letter type review. What we advise doing is actually having candidates submit resumes if required for certain positions and work samples. So those work sample questions being the things that we're going to look to flag. Small tasks that either reflect the job or that get candidates to talk about the values that they have that align you with the organization, align them with the organization, or like questions that relate to motivation. So you have consistency that often you don't have in applications from a cover letter. So say you have candidates complete 2 work samples and submit a resume. How do we remove bias from that process? First thing we do is anonymize them automatically. No names on the resumes, no names on the work samples. And we do that to get rid of implicit bias. But we want to go a step further with mitigating that bias. So we're going to chunk. So you're going to score all of the CVs together, and then you're going to score all of the question 1s together and all of the question 2s. That prevents context switching. Like, if some of you think about when you've been most distracted at work, you have a million tabs open, and you're constantly flicking between them. Context switching causes inefficiencies, also causes mistakes. So chunking ensures you're focusing on the same thing consistently. And then we're going to randomize. So you're going to score the CVs in different orders to the work samples in different orders, to work sample 1, work sample 2. Why? We want to mitigate the halo and horn effect. We want to ensure that we're not sort of scoring the candidates at the top of the pile that are always appearing at the top of the pile higher than those who are being scored at the bottom when we're more tired and more prone to making mistakes. So that's randomization. And then the final thing, or the third thing that we do, rather, the penultimate thing, is ensure you have a consistent marking rubric. So instead of just having this vague sense of, I think this CV is good or bad, you score against a series of questions that you're evaluating against your objective. The same for work samples. And then for the candidates that have scored high enough, that haven't been flagged and haven't plagiarized their responses, ideally, you introduce multiple people. Use crowd wisdom, which we know to be a better way of mitigating bias. And then those marks through the system are reconstituted. That's the value of Applied. It's not having to do this process manually. Before then, you only invite the top performing candidates to interview. And those interviews, again, they're arranged and structured through Applied in a way that ensures you're being objective and fair when it comes to hiring. So what we've introduced as part of this process, especially down here, when reviewing work samples, is the ability to flag work samples that might have used generative AI. Now, I want to go back to the candidate application process and just start by one of the interventions we've made to dissuade the use of AI. So Andrew is applying to a digital marketing role at Acme Corporation. Andrew's answered the work sample questions that we've set. So things like, tell us about a social media campaign that you liked and why, or what's your favorite website, or here's a certain task that you need to do. Now, before Andrew can submit their application, they have to certify that the answers that they used are their own, they're not plagiarized, and they weren't automatically generated using any software. So candidates tick that, and then they read and accept it, and effectively like e-sign a confirmation.
Sorry to disrupt, Bradley. I think you might be sharing. You're still sharing your presentation screen.
That is, thank you very much for that,
No
Kayla.
worries.
Let me
We're sharing a different screen there.
yeah, no, let me go back to the correct screen. Can you all see? Can you all see that? Do you know what? Actually, let me share any specific part of this. Can you all see that?
Yeah, we've got that.
Fantastic. So
Showcase it.
sorry. This is Andrew's application page. He's applying to a role at the ACME for the digital marketing position. Andrew's completed the work samples here that are relevant to the role. And then before being able to submit the application, they have to certify that the answers in that application are their own. They've not been plagiarized. They've not been written by any other individual, and they weren't automatically generated using any software. So this is a more foolproof way of having candidates validate that the work is their own. And it's something that we've built on using A/B testing and looking at what gets the highest fill-in rates and what minimizes the amount of plagiarism that's taking place in the system. So that's the first part of our strategy around generative AI, is dissuading the use of it in the first instance for roles where you don't want it. Now, we've had some discussions around the ways that we might want to frame this. Some organizations may have preference for people utilizing generative AI. Those considerations are currently underway. So watch this space for the copy around that. Now, I want you to imagine, some of you might be familiar with this, for those of you who aren't, you're on the management page of a role. And you can see that here. So one of the best things about using Applied is the ability to easily have candidates submitted to be reviewed in a way that's debiased. So this is an example of a role. One of the things that we've introduced recently, actually, is the ability to remove all of these candidate names as standard in this view. And I'll show you what that looks like in a second. But let's assume you've had 10 candidates submit their applications. You can allocate for those candidates to have the work samples that they've done reviewed by people in your organization, or have their CVs reviewed against a set of focus questions that are important to you. You simply do that by clicking a button here. What I'm going to walk you through now is the new work sample review that enables you to flag candidate answers. So you can see here, we're hiring a product manager. We've got 5 answers to review across 2 questions. I might be a hiring manager that's looking at the system and that's reviewing applications. Now you can see here we've set a work sample that's focused on digital products. What digital products do you use regularly and love? What problem does it solve? Why is it great? We're looking to assess people's motivation for working in a product position, and we're looking to assess people's ability to actually understand a product and the problem it solves and articulate that effectively. Now, as you can see here, some of you who've used the system might be familiar with this. You've got a response from a candidate, a marking rubric that enables you to focus on how good that response is from 1 to 5 stars. And we're going to look at this response and we're going to say, actually, this looks like this is a 3-star, 4-star answer. Now, what you then see is another work sample from another candidate. But I look at this response, and right now I might have a Chat GPT answer up in a separate tab, which we'd actually advise doing as a good sort of screening of this. And we notice that this response almost exactly matches that which has come up through Chat GPT. What we then want to do is flag it. So if we click flag answer, you can use flagging for multiple uses. You might use flagging for a particularly poor answer. But in this instance, we're going to use it for Chat GPT. Some organizations have requested, for example, the ability to flag a response when a candidate's given a 1-word answer, and they want to score that candidate less than 1, and they want to disqualify the candidate early. Others have requested the ability to flag, 5-star answers that are blow away and that really do very well. For this instance, we're going to flag Chat GPT. And we're going to save that flag. And that's then going to become associated with that specific candidate's application and that specific candidate's answer. It's worth saying, long term, the vision would be to perhaps have a Chat GPT answer or indications of what that looks like in this flow directly, so everything can exist in one system. If we come back to the product management role, what you'll notice here actually is that standard functionality I was speaking about. You can't see the names of candidates here if you don't want to in the list view, which is anonymization standard. And then the answers that are highlighted are answers that have been flagged. So we can then look at an individual candidate's application. And this is Willy Wonka. Willy Wonka's applied to the product manager role, and we can click in to the specific answer that they've written, and we can look at the fact that Charlie, when reviewing them, flagged this as a Chat GPT answer potentially. And what you can start to do is look for patterns where somebody's flagged, how similar are the answers, and use that as the basis for your decision as to whether or not you want to go back and either clarify with the candidate or actually just straight up reject them for breaching what your application process looks like. So multiple people can flag candidates, and you can never see if an application has been flagged in the review flow itself. So we don't want to introduce groupthink to this process. We want everyone to review the applications in isolation in a way that easily mitigates bias. So that's that thinking around utilizing ChatGPT. Utilizing flagging ChatGPT answers. What you then might want to do, say we decide this candidate, they've plagiarized their responses. You can then mark that candidate as rejected, and you might have created a different template that explains why their application has been rejected off the back of utilizing ChatGPT or generative AI. This message currently doesn't look like that, but you would be able to create whatever template you like, and you can select the reason, and then have that for plagiarism and so on. And candidates will then get feedback based on their application in accordance with what you want to feed back to those applicants. So that's the main way that we're approaching this right now. It's worth saying, like, we think the power of using AI in hiring is massive, and we're currently in the process of evaluating some use cases for using AI in applied. So it might be making it easier to write work samples. It might be making it easier to write great interview questions, gender neutral job descriptions. Like, we really do see the power of utilizing this technology for hiring well. But we also don't want candidates taking credit for work that's not theirs in the application process itself, which leads me on to my next point, which is that's why you might want to stack different parts of assessment in how you shortlist or assess candidates. So what I'm going to show you here is just a quick recap of how our blind or anonymous CV review works and debias CV review works. So I want you to imagine that you are a hiring manager and you've received candidates' resumes that you're then going to review. So we're hiring an operations manager here. We've got 3 resumes to review. And when I'm ready to start, I'm going to be presented with a series of specific criteria we're looking for on the resume. It's not this vague yes, no, maybe on the whole of the applicant. It's, does this person have the things that we're looking for? And then all we're going to focus on, with the names automatically redacted from this candidate's application, is do they fulfill the responsibilities? Have they shown they can contribute to a team? And do they have accomplishments that are relevant to the role? And we do the same process that we're looking for in the work sample review, being as objective and debiased as we can in evaluating a candidate's resume. At the end of that process, candidates then get a score for how well they did in their resume sift. And if we go back to the dashboard, what we can see here is that for this candidate's application, we have a sift question score and we have a resume score. And we use that as the basis to make hiring decisions. And if you want, you can introduce candidate details because they're not included as standard we want to anonymize as standard the hiring process. Again, that's an updated bit of functionality. In terms of actually managing roles, and some updated functionality from our side before we touch on questions. What you might notice if you go in and are building roles through basic information page has changed. It's been designed for organizations that are hiring remote first or hybrid, as we're seeing, the way that the world of work operates is changing. So if you come in here, you have a different drop-down list based on employee type. So here you can select if you're hiring volunteer versus full-time or part-time work, with details that are fully flexible around the sorts of roles that you're hiring in. In terms of remote preferences, we now have 3 tabs that you can select, from on-site to hybrid to remote, and the ability to transparently outline a salary banding that then relates directly to the back end of the system. So we've been doing quite a lot of thinking around this, and it should be easier than ever to create and post roles through Applied. The other thing that you might notice has changed is the application stages and the ability to select multiple application stages and create a more flexible process than ever before. So typically organizations that use Applied don't have as many multiple choice questions. They use a combination of SIFT and resume review. So if we turn on supplementary documents here, where am I going with this? I think I have it further down. The CV should appear here, but I think I'm using a test account, so it's not. But the idea is that you can stack different forms of assessment into how you actually run your hiring process. And the hiring stages you can define more clearly in accordance with how you want to review candidates and the rigor that you want at each stage of the process. So that's, again, another thing that we've been thinking about, and I would really advise, if you are a customer, reaching out to Sarah or Nancy or Samantha or Chelsea, whoever it is that looks after your account, for streamlining this and making sure that you're making the most of the system. So I think that's a summary of how we're approaching this challenge, and a summary of the newest functionality and vision that we've got in the system. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to look at the questions because I have been on a different tab.
Just a little bit of chat around the legalities of rejecting someone for using AI. I've gone back in the chat, but I just want to kind of clarify. Illegally, we think it's currently being dealt with the same way plagiarism would be. The law hasn't really caught up with things like Chat GPT yet, and particularly around hiring. There's potentially a bit of a grey area, but overall, if you suspect that they have used it and they've still come in with a really excellent answer, then it's potentially worth kind of a follow-up with that candidate. Although we do find that the GPT answers tend to be average at best, very vague. From the research that we've done, it's really difficult to prove that AI has been used. There are detectors out there that you can use to kind of copy and paste the answer into, but they regularly produce false positives. So we've tested putting text that we know has been written by a human, and it still comes out saying it might be AI. So that's really difficult to prove. But what we have seen in a lot of the research we've done is that the best way of detecting these patterns is humans. Humans are really good at detecting patterns. We can take a look at a couple of the AI answers ourselves, and then we can compare it to answers that have come in from candidates, and we can see that pattern. We can see the same number of paragraphs, the same length per paragraph, the patterns that this generative AI produces. So what I would say is try to rely less on the tech to let you know, and try to rely more on the people who are reviewing your questions.
Absolutely. And I think to echo Kayla's point, that's why, if you have multiple flags on a single application, that's usually more cause for concern from multiple people. It's an indication that as a group, you all independently have come to the conclusion that AI is being used, and more often than not, it's not being used very well. What we've seen is an increase in the performance of the average candidate candidates that might have been doing poor answers themselves, like 1, 2 stars, might be scoring 3 stars if they're utilizing AI. The top performing answers tend to be human led. Let me just look at some other questions that have come through. Tim, is it only names that are redacted? What about dates, location information, etc.? So currently we remove anything that relates to a candidate's name in an application. That relates directly to your name at the top of your CV. That also relates to directly to your email address that might contain your name. I think we've lost Kayla, or I can't see Kayla. Currently, we don't remove dates, nor do we remove location information, something that we might consider long term. We have some organizations that might seek to do that, asking candidates to remove it if it's a requirement, but we've not seen a huge request for it, and we wanted to get the functionality out for you to use sooner rather than later. Do you only have the functionality for those 3 levels of assessment for the different aspects when reviewing CVs? Absolutely not, Stephen. So you can go into Applied, and for any role, you can ask any question or set any criteria to review the CV against. So you don't have to ask 3 questions, ask people to fill in 3 questions. The criteria is always yes, some, or no, but you can set as many criteria as you'd like for the CV to be reviewed against, and it's open text. So you can create whatever you want as the basis for scoring applications. I hope that's useful. I can see there's an AI discussion here. Can the multiple choice questions be used as killer questions to exclude candidates in high volume campaigns? We don't have killer questions per se, but what we do have is the ability to easily filter candidates based on scoring at certain. So say you set 8 multiple choice questions, you could select all candidates that have scored below 3 and mark them as unsuccessful on the basis of not scoring high enough with 2 clicks. So that's generally how we approach that, Stephen. Sean, funny thing is, I encourage all of my team to use AI. So candidates who use AI to give really good answers to application questions will get extra credit from me. However, our questions are very technical, so that helps for us. I think that's to a certain extent, Sean, the point that we made that's like we long term are unlikely to have a one size fits all approach for this. The immediate reaction, and given sort of the sectors that we primarily support, is most organizations hiring on the whole want to dissuade candidates from utilizing AI right now, today, to do applications, especially poor ones. But long term, that could change. Like long term, it might be that actually using AI really well is the way in which you should be doing your job applications, you should be working, and the hiring process simply reflects that. So I think this is where we've got up to now on the 8th of August in 2023. What this looks like in 3, 6, 9, 12 months will adapt to the culture, as well as sort of the nature of how work evolves in this space. But rest assured, it's really important to us, and it's top of our priority list. Samantha, what about words such as maternity and photos being redacted from CVs? Yeah, so Samantha, interesting point. We would always advise in your job description explaining that candidates should remove photos from their CVs if they have them, if that's a concern for you. We've not seen too much of a challenge around candidates uploading resumes that have photographs. It's not a legal requirement in the UK. It's not done that much. It is a legal requirement actually in Germany, for example. What about words such as maternity? I'm not too sure I understand the question. If you could clarify in the chat, I'd be happy to address that point.
I guess if someone's put maternity leave on their CV to explain a gap or something like that. Probably
Understood.
Like next phase thing for the CV review.
Understood. So yeah, I mean we don't have the ability to redact that sort of information. However, I think it's really important that you're only ever scoring a resume against the criteria that you've defined. So because you have the ability to set focus questions, the idea is that hiring managers should only ever be focusing on what you've outlined in the focus question. And having a career gap or taking maternity leave should never be a relevant criteria that you should be focusing on if you're utilizing applied to hire. So I think really it's about focusing less on those elements by emphasizing what you should be focusing on. So hopefully that answers that question. Emily, they do it all the time in Europe. Is that they do it all the time in Europe? Is that people attach photos? I've not seen a response on that. It does dilute the blind process, unfortunately. In terms of having candidates uploading photographs, yeah, I mean, like, I'd like to think if we saw this being an issue long term, that we would consider redacting photographs. I've yet to see or hear a huge amount of feedback around that being the bulk way that candidates are submitting resumes. But like, as with all of this tech, it's always evolving, it's always changing, and we're focused on like having the maximum impact with the functionality that and the primary functionality that we were hearing time and time again is anonymizing resumes as standard. Sean, interesting point around the business use case for using AI, flexibility and customizing the process. Yeah, I think that's the emphasis here. Like, we want organizations, if you don't want to use the resume, you don't use the resume. You don't have to use the anonymous CV screen. If you are happy to use work samples and have candidates utilizing Chat GPT answers, you can outline that in your job description. And I'd imagine that long term or medium term, we would have copy that reflects that in the application form. Like, we want to meet organizations where they are, and meet people when they're hiring in roles where they are. And I think that's the vision long term for partnership with all existing customers who are on this call, as well as sort of new organizations that are joining. Kayla, do you have anything else to add on those points?
No, I'm just checking back through the questions now. I think we've answered all of them.
Cool.
If anyone else does have any further questions for Bradley, please do just feel free to pop them in the chat right now. Alternatively, do get in touch with your contact here at Applied, whether that's Bradley directly or whether that's your customer success manager. If you'd like any further clarification on any of the points that we've discussed today, we are, very much adapting to a changing world as far as some of this stuff is concerned. But we're building fast, we're learning fast, and it really is. It's a great opportunity to just make the platform better and better. And so, yeah, if there's any feedback that you'd like to come back to us with, please do feel free to do that as well. We're always very keen to hear what people are dealing with out there. Any specific training on anonymized CV screen?
That's an interesting question. I actually think that we don't have like a bulk training that we do, but if you reach out to your account manager, I believe it might be Nancy or Samantha, I think if you wanted guidance around how best to do that, we'd only be too happy to help.
I do believe that Sarah covers it in our onboarding training. But if you're already past that point, then absolutely, I'm sure it wouldn't be a problem for you to get involved in the next training there.
Real. Amazing. Quick ask from me, if you have enjoyed this session or any of our events, please give us a shout out on LinkedIn, give us a follow. Do feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. We're always posting content around what we're doing and sort of the impact that we're having. And if we're having a really positive impact in your organizations, then we'd love to hear. We'd love to hear on socials about it. So yeah, I think that's everything from me, Kayla.
Amazing. Thank you ever so much to everyone for joining us today. We'll be sending out this recording, and also I'll send out the slides. A couple of people have requested them. And we'll be letting you know very soon when the next event is. And please do come to us with your questions or feedback. We are really keen to hear about all of your experiences. So thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Cheers.